Welcome, folks. This is Inside the Leader's Mind, where what's in the way becomes the way. I'm your host, David Susan. And today, they say leadership is an art, but my guest today has proven it's also a rigorous science. Dr. Shauna Waters is an organizational psychologist who has done everything from designing high stakes assessment systems for the military to helping scale a unicorn startup by 50 times. She's currently the CEO of Fractional Insights, where she focuses on performance engineering, redesigning the very way we manage and measure work. She argues that while AI is a massive disruptor, it won't be the last, and organizations must build the adaptive capacity to survive whatever comes next. With a PhD in industrial organizational psychology and statistics, Dr. Waters brings a unique lens to the table. She treats AI adoption not as an IT upgrade, but as a human transformation. Her philosophy centers on psychological ergonomics, the idea that we must design our roles and systems to fit how humans actually work best. She's the author of The Coaching Shift and The Practical Guide to HR Analytics, and she's here to dig into the science of organizational effectiveness. Please welcome Dr. Shauna Waters.
Thank you so much, David. It's really exciting to be back here with you, and I love talking to you. So this is a great treat for me.
Oh, I was so excited when we first met to have you on the program today. I'd love to start before we go any farther. For someone who's listening and they've never heard the term or they don't know what an organizational psychologist is, can you explain what that is?
Absolutely. So psychology is the science of understanding, predicting, and manipulating behavior. We do that at work. So really what organizational psychologists do is we try to understand people deeply, work, the work that we need people to do, and the context, and try to optimize the combination of those three things. So I spent the first part of my career studying individuals. I like to say turning them into numbers, really deconstructing them and understanding, their personality and their intelligence and, knowledge, skills, abilities, things like that. Uh, and deconstructing work. So, what are the tasks and the skill requirements that we have for work, and then the context of an organization? What is culture? How do we think about people, systems, and processes, and how those things need to come together? And then in the back half of my career, it was like, okay, let's look at the art of that. To your point about the art of leadership, and how do you bring those things together in a way that they want to work in harmony as opposed to in opposition?
And so when it does come into harmony versus opposition, what is the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve? Because some people will say, and it depends on who you talk to. Some people say, no, it's all about sales. It's all about widgets. It's all about manufacturing. It's all about blah, blah, blah. And then there's the other side of the house that says, hey, human capital is our big expenditure. So what is it that you really try to get out of doing this? What is the real benefit or the impact we're trying to move toward?
Yeah. In my view, the beginning and end of any value chain is a person. So even if I take this very instrumental view of the job of a business is to, uh, you know, create value for its shareholders. Well, we do that by solving a human pain. Ultimately, that's how our company is making money. And so by understanding deeply the people and that really from the internal side, the employees, that too is understanding the pain that employees are experiencing, what motivates them, what makes them want to give discretionary effort to help you achieve the or solve the pain for your customer. There's a human in that entire loop. And so a lot of our work is really trying to understand the 360 view of that and bringing it all into alignment.
Which ultimately, I'm assuming, is the benefit is what? Better culture, performance, engagement, morale. all of the above? What are we shooting? What are we
Yeah,
really trying to achieve?
it's all of the above. I mean, really for us, it's about helping organizations and individuals thrive. And our philosophy that's backed by a lot of data and research is that those two things are mutually reinforcing. I think often we think that there's this trade-off to be made that, if I want a profitable business, I need to squeeze the employees to make that possible. But really a lot of the evidence would argue the opposite, that really if I want to create a profitable business, especially in a sustainable way where 10 years from now that business is still, thriving, that our people have to thrive with it.
Love that. Love that. Now I want to shift a little bit to the name of your company, Fractional Insights. So, in simple terms, what is Fractional Insights?
Yeah.
And what was the real driver motivator where you said, I've done all this work I've done with military, et cetera, but now I'm going to go do my own thing. So what the heck is Fractional Insights and
What
the
is it?
motivation behind that?
It's a great question, and I think the name is a whole conversation in of itself. But we're a research-backed advisory and consulting firm that's really helping organizations figure out how to continue to perform, transform, adapt to the future of work. So we do that by bringing to bear uh, decades of organizational psychology and science, and really using this data and evidence-based approach to help people understand how to um, really continue to succeed through change. And this is not change, I think, in the past where we've thought about, change management as like a project that we're going to do it and then we're going to be able to move on with our lives. I think we all know that even if we were to just look at AI, this is an emergent technology that is going to be in constant evolution. And so how do we keep up with that as individuals and as organizations? So that's really what we're trying to help with. Our why of why we did this and why we did this now is really that, again, we've spent our careers studying people and work. And there's a lot of things that during that time you can tell really isn't working for people or organizations. I think there's very few people who you would go to and they say, yep, it's all great, nothing to change, right? CEOs especially. And some of these things that we have felt we just have to live with, or like they're the physics of what it's like to work, we have an opportunity to change right now, right? AI is coming onto the scene and it is forcing us or allowing us to reconsider all the fundamentals of what is work, where does it get done, by whom or what, even why. Uh, and we stand at a crossroads in that, right? This is an incredibly powerful general purpose technology that we can use to scale and accelerate everything that exists today. So if there's a problem, we can make it broader and faster than ever before. Um, or we can use this as a design moment and say, how might we want to design it, given that we have this fresh opportunity to take fresh eyes to it? And so that is really the moment that we're hoping to step into and do so with intentionality to really say, what are we designing for the sake of what? What's the experience, the future we want to build? And that's both from the organizational lens and in terms of, what does success look like for us and how do we do that better? But also for individuals, like what's your experience of work that you want to have? And how do we use this moment to create more of that?
And from some of the things you were just talking about, because you mentioned performance engineering right in the intro, is this all fall under performance engineering, or am I misunderstanding that phrase, that term?
Yeah, it absolutely does. So, as I said, there we have so many choice points right now, even as we think about, AI and AI transformation, which I think most organizations would say like that's an imperative, that's an existential demand is for us to adopt AI. That's fine. How are we going to do it? What does that look like? There are ways we can optimize for speed and efficiency, and that's sort of like you think about it as how do we reduce costs in order to increase profit. But another way that we can look at things is by actually taking this view of abundance and of how do we use AI for innovation and to create new things and new solutions that weren't possible, to augment the human experience in positive ways, to reach new markets, things like that. And that's a different way. And we get to a different place depending on the choices we make down that path. And so, I think that what this is really about is engineering performance in a way that starts with what is performance to us? What do we mean? And then saying, okay, given that, how do we use the technology in a way that helps us get there versus what some of the alternatives might be? And the same for all the other things in our, design choices in our systems. Think about, the old adage, you show me the incentives, I'll show you the behavior you're going to get. And that's true with whether we're talking about compensation or social consequences of things, right? So there's all these things in our environment that we often just kind of take for granted or let happen. And so performance engineering is about whether it's AI or your performance management system coming in and saying, okay, let's really look at where you want to go and how do we create the environment for that to be the path of least resistance.
And to optimize what we're doing and get the results we're really trying to achieve, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
if a leader, let's say a leader comes to you, what is the problem in their mind that they're really trying to solve, even if they maybe don't say it that way?
Yeah. So usually when leaders come to us, the acute pain or the symptom that's showing up is something like um, lagging, sales metrics or a stalled transformation. Or it might even be something on the human capital side, like high turnover or low engagement or things like that. So those are usually, symptoms that are coming up in the business or coming up in their people experience. And what they're really trying to solve for in that is I have a strategy uh, that I'm really happy with. And my frustration comes from the gap between that strategy and the results I'm seeing. Right. So how do I uh, create the bridge between the strategy and what execution looks like? And every business problem is a people problem, at least today. Like maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we might have a different answer for that. But really, what we're trying to figure out is like, how do I get the people to do what I want them to do? That's often the thing
Mm,
that they're
And
not
are they
saying.
usually are they aware that that is it, or is it they're focused on the symptom and they're just saying, "Hey, this is a problem. This is a problem. We need it fixed." And do they ever think that the solution is over here, but really it's a people problem? Do they see that connection when they come to you, or is that kind of what you do? You open their eyes to that.
Yeah, I think we see a mix, I think often the people who are coming to us, like they already believe that, people are part of this equation and that's kind of how they find us out. But where it's the unlock of the aha of, oh, yeah, the people are part of the challenge here. And then how do we resolve that is usually if I'm at say a happy hour or a conference or something like that, and I'm talking to a non or a C-suite leader, for example, who is not in HR. They're often, the ones who are like, oh yeah, like if you ask enough questions, you always get back to, it's behavior change that's really hard.
Interesting. So, what is it that leaders might be doing today that they think is going to help the performance, but it's actually making it worse?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's happening today, and this is typical for, tightening macroeconomic conditions or whatever, is people are swinging the pendulum back to kind of strong management. Is one way to describe it. Where I think during COVID there was a sense that there was a lot of focus on well-being and employee benefits and whole person kind of orientation. And then coming out of COVID, there's a tightening, right? Where people are seeing lagging performance and it's like, okay, that brings up the natural reaction to try to tighten, control, things like that. And I think it's a totally natural reaction. Um, but if it's not done carefully, you can do that at the expense of things like innovation, things like discretionary effort. It's like you have to be careful of ending up on a different team as your team. And so that is something that I think I'm seeing a lot of these days. And it's showing up in, for example, the force distribution. You remember the old GE Rank and Yank? That's making a massive comeback right now. Um, and there's a lot of reasons why that's a really risky move.
So is this that they're focusing more on fixing people versus fixing the environment around the people? Is that really what this is?
Yeah, that's a big part of it is fixing people or not fixing them and just giving up on them, sort of saying,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's really about the metrics, the numbers, and sort of lacking the curiosity or the patience, the investment to make to say like, okay, let's really uncover what the root cause is, support each other and getting through it and things like that. There's kind of this like, there's always someone better waiting at the door or a technology at the door that is going to solve this problem for me. And
What-
so,
What's the risk of that?
yeah, well, the risk is that it creates a sort of chilling effect in the company where it's not just about the decision you're making today for that person, but what is the level of safety and risk taking that exists in the environment? Because that ends up having a big impact on your ability to continue to sustain and grow, right? Every company to survive over the long haul has to do two things really well. One is to produce, right? And that's about efficiency and standardization and scale and things like that. But the other is to innovate because these, life cycles of a company are physics, right? You don't stay in growth unless you kind of shift to a new market over time, which requires innovation. And people don't innovate when they're scared.
That can be so basically if they're just flipping people, the risk is that environment's not changing, so it's going to be the same thing over and over. Is that
Well, and yeah, and anyone who is left is now in protection mode as
oh,
opposed
I see.
to a
Yeah.
generative
Their
mode.
fear that it's going to happen to
It's
them, right?
fear, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a huge fault line in the sort of psychological contract between an employee and an employer. And we see this in like trust in organizations, all institutions to be fair, but trust in organizations is at a low point that it ever has been in history. And if you think about, well, why might that be? What is trust? What are the foundational components of trust? Well, it's credibility, right? Does somebody actually know what they're doing? Um, it is integrity. Can I predict what you, David, are going to do? Based on the past. So it's like following through between what you say and what you do. And then the third is benevolence. And benevolence is about, do you have my best interests at heart? And that's the one that in particular, I think people are really feeling a loss of, in this environment where we're seeing so many sequential layoffs and this like control orientation, because that feels like it's coming very much from a place of like what's good for the organization, but without that mutuality or the reciprocity and what's good for you too.
Now, do you see this mindset? Do you ever see people say, I'll say leaders that hear what you're talking about and they go, that's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo psyche. You don't understand. And then the second part, I hate doing two-part questions, but it popped in my head. And then do you notice a difference at different size companies? Meaning Fortune 100, yeah, they're already bought in, they get it. but these people aren't, or mid-size totally don't get it, or like, do you see any trends where
Mm.
that attitude of this is just a bunch of hooey, right?
Yeah,
It's touchy feely, softy stuff, and that
soft
doesn't matter.
stuff.
So yeah, soft stuff. So what's
Yeah,
I'd love your take on all that.
absolutely. I mean, we get that all the time. I think that's one of the challenges, the type of work we do and being a psychologist. First thing people say is like, "Are you reading my mind right now?" And then the second thing is like usually something about like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, but I've got to report to the board or I've got bigger things to worry about," sort of thing. Um, I found that I wouldn't say that I've seen um like a hard trend in terms of this size company leader versus this size are different. I see a lot of individual differences in that. But I think where it can become real is like if you get into conversations with people, like David, if I ask you, like, tell me about the last time like you did a favor for someone. What what was that? Give me the situation and who was it? Why'd you do it? What was it?
Oh, you're going to ask me, put me on the spot right now?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
this
my
is reciprocity.
gosh.
I told you. No.
Last time we did a favor, can I cheat and say it was a co-favor with my wife and I for my neighbor who cut his finger,
Oh, your neighbor
like
cut his
almost cut
finger.
it off? Yeah,
And
like
what did
days
you all
ago. So, well,
that's
so
this
where
sounds like a
it's so
good
funny.
story.
Oh, we have there's a bunch. There's so many. Yeah, we do. Yeah, but my wife is always the leader, and I'll be really frank, she's the leader of the pack. But I learned by watching her. No, she's just always she makes this kind of this health concoction, you know. It's a mix of I don't know what's in it. It's got but she always is bringing it like to our neighbor. And so he cut his finger. So we go over there and, we bring that or, watch their kids if we need to. So that kind of stuff. But I do the same thing, right? I just can't think of, I know I've done something recently because we're always helping out, but
Yeah,
I try to be a good person,
a good person. Okay. Well, why the neighbor,
benevolent.
right? Yeah. But why the neighbor? Like what makes you want to help him?
Why I'll take it broader because my wife and I talk about this because I do a lot. I do without boasting. I It's probably the way I was raised
Hmm.
that I help others, period. Like it's just something in me. I want to be able to help. Now, do I get something out of it? I'm sure that's probably subconsciously yes, but I kind of feel like it's the right thing to do. It's just the thing to do to help others. So I very frequently go out of my way to help others. Usually, oftentimes, because of the type of work I do, it's helping coaching them. They've got a
Yeah.
problem with a boss or they have a problem with even a child because I have three kids and so it's oftentimes um, they'll seek help from me and I love to do it because it's the reason I do what I do. It's to try to make an impact on others
Hmm.
because I think someone probably either did it for me or didn't do it for me. And it's just my way of paying it forward. So it doesn't matter who it is. I tend to be very helpful because I think not enough people are.
Yeah.
And that's not really a comparison thing. I mean, this is supposed to be interviewing you, but it's so funny. But really, what it is I really like to help people, and I think it just if I can make an impact on one life, that's kind of how I feel, and that's what
Hmm.
it is. So whether it's the neighbor, one of the other neighbors, one of my buddies, or even when I'm doing a keynote, people come up to me, and I've had people crying at the end of my keynote because I touch a chord on there like, oh my gosh, you made me think about this and then, I'll soothe them somehow or give them some advice or something that might be able to help them in their relationship with their manager, their employee, their family. So it's just all the time.
Hmm.
That was a
That's
long-winded answer.
no, it's a beautiful answer. That was a beautiful answer. And one of the things that you just demonstrated is how important this like making an impact, but not just making an impact, it's impact on what? Like on people.
People.
And this is one of the things that, I think a lot of different disciplines, definitely psychology and motivational theories show us is like the pinnacle of meaning and purpose really always comes back to people.
Mm, Yeah.
Um, there's a scholar I like named Martin Ford who calls it thriving with social purpose, right? And so, in a lot of our work, we study these, what are these core human needs? And we refer to them as the universal need triad. Um, Three things: security. We all need security. We need to feel safe. That's both in terms of fairness, but also getting our basic survival needs met. Growth. So, am I improving, growing, becoming, a more complete and full version of myself? And can I express that? And then significance, which is like, do I matter? Does my
I
work
matter. Yeah.
matter? And when you think about how all those things come to bear and what actually makes us make decisions about how to expend the limited energy, time, resources we have in this world, people are the kind of common motivating thread to that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so if I am an enterprise, and first of all, at least today, people are about 70% of my of my spending is going to people. Um, how do I use those resources to their full optimize percent, right? And and it is the relational component of this, right? It's relationships, it's trust. And so if I start to ask you about a particular thing in your life, that becomes like much more believable because we are all experiencing that on a day-to-day basis. I've heard even CEOs and investors who advocate for replacing all the people with the bots. And if you get in conversation with them, what they care about most is the hug they just had with their, son or daughter or
Right.
whatever before.
Right.
So it's like I think if we really break it down, like we have a lot of like trappings that make it easy to say like, no, it's about the numbers and it's about the results or whatever. Organizations are not technical systems, they're social systems, and we are a social species. And so, if we want to unlock the potential, economic or otherwise, we have to care about the people stuff.
You know, I love that. And I wanted to ask you about that social system versus technical. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And what does that really mean in real life?
Yeah, well, what it means is, first of all, change is hard, right? So, change by definition is like leaving something from the past and stepping into an unknown. So, what is going to make me want to do that? And all leadership is change, leading into what? um, I have to trust that the future is better than the past to to be able to do that. And so, how do I convince someone to do it? I mean, we need trust in that. That is the social fabric of an organization. Um, and so I think a lot of times, like, especially in our desire to move fast, like we want to engineer out all the messy stuff, all the emotions and all the social dynamics and whatever. But I think if we reframe organizations as a social system, like that's not the noise, that's actually the fuel. Like that is actually the how we get to where we want to go is because like at the end of the day we carry information through each other. We inspire and trust, all of that through each other and that is through relationships. Um and so, it's not as I mean even if we look at I think AI is a great example, although any digital transformation of the past is the same thing. People spend all the money on the technology. And that's not the hard part. The hard part is getting the people to use the technology. Well, why is that hard? Well, because it means you got to get them to do something different, convince them that the
Change.
future is better than the past, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, I think so often we end up like spending the money on the processes and the technology and getting frustrated that we're not getting the outcomes we want. and then realizing like after the fact that like, oh, it's because there's this social fabric and the like I need to see David, who I respect, doing the thing that he's telling me to do before I trust that it's actually the right move, you know? Like we're making all of our decisions based on what we see other humans doing.
Earlier, while you were talking, you talked about root cause. You
Oh,
threw that word out, and that's a huge thing for me. Most of my work is focused on finding kind of the keystone and getting to the root
yeah.
cause, that because that's the real lever. In the work you do, what do you think that root cause of change is that will create change that you're talking about?
Yeah. So I mentioned that we talk a lot about these universal needs. And I think that if you ask why enough, you generally get back to some combination of security, growth, and significance, security being the most primal driver of things. And and so the root cause is often that something in our environment is in conflict with those needs. So for example, I'm going to go back to AI just because it's a conversation I'm in every day. But I want people to use AI. I want people to use this technology. So I'm going to stand up as leader and, explain all the wonderful reasons why this is important. And I'm going to tell them that they're going to get fired if they don't do it and, all of that. And I'm doing that in part because I am trying to trigger their security threat. Um, to really incentivize them to get over this like inertia and change. Well, in reality, what they're thinking is I implement this thing and all I'm doing is helping you eliminate my job.
Yeah.
You're not going to need me. And oh, by the way, at the same time, like if I can be automated by this thing, like, do I matter? Does my work matter? Did it ever matter? Like, am I important to you? Am I just a number on this thing? So it's like we end up with, in very unintentional ways, designing our systems in ways that operate against our own interest, even as a corporation. So we call this angst, right? The angst of insecurity, the angst of stagnation, the angst of insignificance. And that angst, we know that people make decisions based on emotion more than facts, right? So that is a drag on the organization. It's a drag on your ability to achieve your goals. And so, a lot of when we go in and we're looking at the root cause, like what we're finding is these friction points where is there something that you're doing, whether it's, consciously, unconsciously, subtly, or overtly, that is creating that angst in your workforce in a way that is getting in the way of you achieving your need, ultimately your objectives.
And even the angst, the example you gave where it's like you press on someone to trigger this security or insecurity. Doesn't that also backfire with different personalities? Because some people will fight back, right? You challenge them and they're like, okay, but other people might acquiesce and not acquiesce, but they'll just what's the word I'm looking for? But they go the opposite direction, right?
Yeah.
Not for the other reasons you mentioned about fear of my job, but just the threat causes what's the word? When we back down, we turn it, we don't do anything.
Oh,
We
yeah.
basically quiet quit in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's learned helplessness, you just
Thank
kind
you.
of
I was
give
trying
up.
to figure out what that word was. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this is one of the things that we tend to find is that often in these cases of a situation that is not aligned with people's needs, the people who are your best people are the ones who will leave um, first, right? Because they know they have other options. Um, And so it's really often, the people who are will end up clinging to a job even when it's not meeting their needs. Um, that, maybe because they're not seeing other opportunity. You might have heard
And they're
the
a
like,
lower performer.
yeah,
So
it's like,
you're kind of stuck. Yeah. So you're stuck with the people you really don't want.
Exactly.
And then if you lay them off, the problem is your top performers go too,
Yep.
potentially.
Yeah.
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 Now, it, is this all, you use the term psychological ergonomics. Is this, is this what this is, or is that something else?
Yeah, so psychological ergonomics is really the methodology that we develop to bring those things back in alignment. So I have a standing desk here, it goes up and down, and why does that exist? Why do I have it? Well, in the field of physical ergonomics, we learned that, hey, like if my monitor is not at the right height and my neck is, hurting and I'm straining or my eyes are straining, or I have carpal tunnel, like I'm not going to be as productive as I would otherwise, either because I'm having to take time off to go get, physical therapy appointments, whatever, or because I'm just less eff- efficient at what I'm doing. So, what psychological ergonomics is a testament to is it is about how to, that angst is the physical pain, it's the analog, it's the psychological pain that is akin to your wrist hurting or your neck hurting due to the environment you're in. And so we are saying like, what's the desk that we can raise or lower? What's the version
Right.
of that for the psychological
But
environment?
psychologically,
hmm Exactly.
that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think if you look historically at all fields, it was like we sort of started with the most obvious, like our physical world, right? And recognizing that, oh yeah, like OSHA, for example, like occupational health, like matters because it's not good for people or for business if our employees are dying of black lung, right? So we need to put
Right.
in some standards and some protections to keep our employees healthy and safe. And like, the next rung then becomes like the awareness that our psychology matters too, especially in an era of knowledge work where the largest risks in our environment often are psychological for the types of output that we're trying to generate. So I think that's where we are is like it's time to, kind of import that same mindset of our physical world into our psychological.
That's really cool. I think that's a neat, is that, and you said that's your thing,
Yeah, that's
right?
our thing is
That's really cool.
yeah,
I love that. That is really cool.
thank you.
Psychological ergonomics. That's really cool. As I've worked with leaders, I've worked with executives, coached, etc. One thing I've noticed is as they gain more responsibility and power, sometimes they've gotten more disconnected from what's really happening. What do you have an insight on why you think they do that or why that happens?
Yeah, so we refer to this as altitude sickness. But it's a phenomenon that I think is it's understood that as we raise in power or socioeconomic status, any of these things, like our world gets more curated, right? You have a team of people around you who are making sure that, you're getting the answers you want. You're in elite spaces, VIP programs, conference rooms on the other side of the building, different floor, private jets. Like, think about any of those things. And obviously, like, this is, at an upper echelon, but everybody has more power than someone. So as we rise in power, like our perspective changes. We things look different from the plane window than they do on the ground. So that's kind of well understood. What I think is like less well known is that there's also uh, neuroscience that explains some of this, which is that our the part of our brains responsible for empathy and our mirror neurons actually get smaller as we rise to power. And right, which is like, okay, so we've got contextual social factors that are causing, influencing this. And then also things that are actually changing in our biology that are making it harder and harder for us to understand the perspective of the people in our stewardship.
How does that happen?
I think that again, like in some ways your world's getting bigger, in some ways your world's getting smaller, but there's just more distance. You know, Now, the reality of this is that like we know that people have different perspectives and we design for that in some ways in organizations, and then we end up with cross-functional teams as an example where it's like you can see this part of the elephant, I can see this part of the elephant. We have to come together on that. But we don't often do that as much in terms of hierarchy and power. And so we get more and more and more separation. Um, And if you want to, again, really be able to drive change, especially in this world where uh, things are moving really fast, and we need the people on the edges of the organization to be moving in concert because they find out often before we do a variety of things, we got to figure out ways to bridge that gap, you know? And so, like, we refer to this as structural empathy. If I know that I'm going to have a blind spot around something, I can design for that. Like, how do I intentionally, proactively combat this, I guess I would call it a limitation, almost like a deficit that I'm going to have just through the physics of progressing through my career or whatever it might be. How do I not lose touch with the experience of the masses, right? Because nobody wants to do that. Nobody's doing that on purpose. And I think that gives us a choice point, of again, it's about design and intentionality, and whether it's taking the long way to get your coffee and stopping in to talk to people who maybe aren't in the same meetings you're in, or engaging intentionally in reverse mentoring, or having your board of advisors who, again, are from very different parts of life. Like maybe it's one of my teenagers, right? Getting input from them to say like, what does this sound like from your perspective? Um, there are things that we can do to mitigate the risk of disconnection.
So it's fascinating as I hear this because if it's happening, it's not as easy as just do it. It sounds like it's the intentionality and the desire, and proactively saying, "I want to stay connected. I want to get better," and that might be one of the reasons why it's harder for other people to understand why people are the way they are,
Right.
because they're like, "Why are they like that?" Well, because they are. But if they don't look in the mirror, if they don't have a mirror held up to them and say, look, here's the impact that this is having and the impact you could have, if they don't, what I'm hearing is if they don't proactively make an effort and say, this is the scenario, I have to have this intention to reconnect to is am I hearing this right? Is that what
That's
you're
right. That's right. It's first the awareness that just by virtue of where I'm standing, and we can think of this in a physical space too. Like my view in my room is not the same as your view in your room, and we can get that. But it's like for some reason, I think it often feels threatening to say like I don't have all the information, or I can't actually understand what you understand because I'm not standing where you're standing. Like, so the awareness that we have that limitation is, I think, step one. And then step two is because that's always true and it gets harder with more distance, I have to create habits and structures and systems to help me see what I can't see. You have glasses, right? Like you do that because like you know that you need something to augment your vision, and that's really what it's about. How can I augment my vision on what the root cause is of everybody else's
right? But it
experience as
starts with
well.
that desire and that willingness, really in anyone.
Right.
Nothing's going to happen because we're creatures of habit. And unless we all look in the mirror and say, I want change
Yep.
where I'm at and where I'm going, like you talked about, it's got to be the desire has to be great enough that we look in the mirror and say, I'm willing to make the effort. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I want to, I want to shift gears just a little bit, and talk about AI. And it's we all know it's accelerating, and as AI is accelerating, and you've mentioned it a few times in this conversation, what are leaders underestimating right now about AI?
Yes. Well, I think one thing is just the continuous nature of the change. I think even when we thought about like cloud computing or something like that. We had the cloud, we've got to get everything on the cloud. That's a massive, huge lift. It's a pain, but once it's there and we're good. I think the nature of AI and that, it's improving exponentially and changing, especially agentically, like it's changing itself um, over time. Like this is a really different kind of challenge than we've been thinking about. And so it's not just about fundamentally upgrading our technology systems. It's about fundamentally upgrading our human operating systems because I think we're entering a world of complexity, pace, change that is really hard for most people. And that really um, shifts the burden on like what do we need from leaders then? What are people gonna need to get through that? Um, and how do we support them, you know?
So what's something you wish leaders really understood better about people at work then that would help?
Well, I think one of the things is again, like back to this idea of, it is not just a paycheck. It is for some people rank order, but like those three universal needs, security, growth, and significance, 97% of people look to work to meet those needs. So even the paycheck becomes also about like, who am I because of what I do? So this component of identity is really important. And so when we're introducing things like AI, which threatens security, growth, and
A
significance,
lot, yeah.
we have to help people not just like start using this tool, but really change how they think about themselves, how they think about identity, how they think about the value that they bring to the organization and ultimately to the world. Because, let's say, well, we'll take CEOs, right? There's research, some of it's been published in Harvard Business Review, that AI can already do like 60+% of a CEO's job better than a human can, right? So we're normally talking about these like entry
Crazy.
level jobs and stuff like that, but what is a CEO's job? So much of it is just making decisions. And so if I now know that more than half of my job can be done better by an algorithm, like who am I now? Like what is the value I bring? And so I think we have to continue to help people say, okay, I am not what I do. I am not the decisions I make in it, right? I have to now reorient around the value that I produce regardless of how it's done and help people think about where do they fit in this value chain and what is it going to look like, because we can't promise them that it's not going to take their job or it's not going to, right? But what can we promise them? What won't change? How are we going to make these decisions going through? It's like the storytelling and the, really speaking to again that, you know credibility, integrity, and benevolence. Like, do I have your best interest at heart? What is that going to look like? Right? Because otherwise, I think people can get really lost. And what shows up as resistance is actually like, just kind of a natural human response.
Fascinating. And at the end of the day, we're still humans
Mm-hmm.
and we're still social creatures
Mm-hmm.
and we still feed off other energy of people. And I think societally, especially after COVID and COVID out of COVID with social media, we've kind of taken a little dip, in my opinion, where people have moved away. But I think everything that I've ever seen in my life, everything goes through cycles.
Yeah.
And it eventually things come back where people go, wait, I understand we got technology, it's replacing maybe whatever, but they'll start to realize how important relationships and connection are. And so I think it's just change. I think it's just different, is what
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think this goes back to maybe what you and I are both arguing, which is that, like, at the end of the day, if at our most basic molecular level, like, we are social species
Yeah.
and it comes down to each other, um, I do think that in some way, shape, or form, like, that is what is going to become premiumized, I guess.
Yeah,
And we're
it's a good
already
word.
seeing some of that, right? Where it's like there's so much talk about like dating apps and how awful they are, and that like the whole thing needs to be re-engineered. And so what's popping up are these movement bars where you have to lock your cell phone in a little
Yeah,
bag
right.
when you walk in, or I think it was in New York where there was this like sit at a bar Saturdays where like the whole thing was, get off the apps and go sit in a bar where it's like, yeah, how do
So
we get back to the human
yeah,
connection?
yeah. I read one the other day about the communal tables, right, in these
Man.
restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Because I started seeing more and more, and I'm like, really? Do people want to sit by other people? Because normally it's I got my cubby hole to sit for food, and you get your cubby hole. But this article said that more and more that especially a younger generation, they're looking for connection, and they like these communal tables because it does just what you're saying. It forces the connection and interaction. And I was shocked when I read that. I'm
Yeah.
like, really? Wow.
And the question I have is, I think that's what we're seeing now. I think we're going to see like a new era of Luddites come, sort of be born who are really like seeking that out because we've experienced it before
I
in
don't want any
moments.
technology. I'm going to go without, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what
Yeah.
I wonder is over time what happens. So I was in a really interesting conversation earlier today with like a wonderfully sociable and personable, um, very sophisticated senior leader at a large organization. And he was talking about ultimately being able to replace workers with AI, with bots. And really, his comment in there was that, yeah, like people and culture, like it's so dramatic, and it's so much cleaner and easier to go with the bot. And that is true. And as we have the like personification of these AI tools, and they'll tell us they're sycophantic, right? Like they'll tell us anything we want to hear. All of our ideas are great.
Oh, what a great idea. I was thinking of jumping off the roof. That's a great idea, David.
Right, right. It's frictionless.
Yeah.
It's frictionless. And so not only is that appealing to start interacting with, but over time, we continue to lose our ability to deal with the real relationships that can be dramatic. But it's like that messiness that really develops deep connection. So I mean, that's where again, sort of some of what motivates me is like thinking about my kids and at that crossroad and it's like, what do we want? What do we want that
Yeah.
future to look like? Do we want all our social skills to atrophy because it feels, ease to interact with the bots who won't push
I
back?
don't it's a little to me it's a little bit of a wait and see because you don't know, Anyway. So, two last questions. First one, and it's been lovely having you. I want to
Mm.
so appreciate you. Uh, First question is, what's a belief about work or leadership you think that we're going to look back on and we're going to say, I can't believe it used to be this way?
Mm. Oh gosh. Um, there's a lot of that. But I think one thing is just this notion of work as this economic transaction. Um, I think right now, if I were to ask you, like, what's the future of work? Like, will we have to work? Will people be working at all? We get a range of answers, but I often hear, like, no, it's going to be optional. Like, work's going to be optional. Are people wired to work? People are like, well, no, if they don't have to work, they won't work. And I would say, like, I actually think people are so deeply wired to work, but the difference comes in, like, how do you define it? And most people have this idea of like an economic transaction. And I think my definition aligns with more like what you were talking about, what lights you up, which is it is converting energy to create value for myself or others with an emphasis on the others, right? And through that lens, like if you study people like you, like David, what are you doing in your spare time? Like you don't have to go help people, you don't have to go coach, mentor, all those things, but you're doing it. I think most often you look at the people who don't have to work and they are engaging in some kind of value creation for themselves
It's
or
true.
others,
Yeah.
right? So I think some of it is like I, we've somehow slipped into this world where we it feels like work is the enemy, and it is something that takes us away from the things we want to be doing. And I think we're going to look back at that and be like, wow, like why did we do that to ourselves? Be- because work can be like the ultimate expression of our passions and our gifts to the world, and I think what brings us joy.
Love that. That's so cool. All right, last question for our day today, and that is comes from basically when I was a kid. People have heard this if they've heard the podcast, but I want to make sure if you this first time you've heard it, the context. When I was a kid, I remember when my aunts, uncles, family, whatever, they would ask me a question. Oh, how's school? Fine. How are your grades? Fine. And then and the whole time I'm always thinking, why don't they ask me fill in the blank? But they didn't know to ask me that, right? And then I've got with my kids, I've got three kids, and if I ask too many questions, I'm being nosy. But then in another breath, they're like, "Well, you don't know anything about me." So my thought is always, "Well, what's the question what should I be asking you that I don't know to ask you?" Because if I knew to ask you, I would have asked you. So the question is, what is a question you wish people would ask you? They just don't know to ask you.
Hmm.
So you rarely ever get asked this, but you really wish that people would because you want to be able to share something with them. What would that be?
Yeah. Um, I think this is such a good question. Like the question about the question is always like the dialed in, right? Um, I think that maybe the question that I don't get asked that would be meaningful is, why am I so hopeful and uh kind of convicted about this change, right? Because so many people I talk to are like, you know, you're trying to solve these like big societal complex systems things or whatever. Like, what about just like in your neighborhood, a thing that, right? Like, wouldn't that be easier? Um, but I think for me, I mentioned coal mining earlier, and that's a very meaningful context for me because my grandfather died of black lung.
Oh,
Um, he was a coal miner in Appalachia, and the whole community died of black lung. And so it was this community of widows, and that is, kind of the context that my mom grew up in. Her mom was only a fourth grade graduate. Her dad was a seventh grade graduate. They lived in extreme poverty, all of these things. She and all of her brothers got out of that situation through the military, which gave them the pathway to see the world and, um, get college educated and things like that. My mom had to leave the military 1 year short of her college degree because at that time, a woman could not get married and stay in the military, and she and my father fell in love. One generation later, I'm a woman with a PhD who has been working in corporate America in executive roles. Um, and I think about that amount of change in just three generations, right? Where like elementary school education, um, physical risks. How did we get that solved? OSHA, right? It was those regulations and society saying this is not okay. And then my mom, like how did we get to now, there's dual career military professionals and women in the military and all of these things. Well, that was, the civil rights movements. Um, to now me, and to see us sliding back is I know that we can do better because I've seen it done before. Um, and I want my girls to still have something better than what I had. So that's probably what it would be.
Love it. I love it. That's fantastic. If people want to stay in touch with you, they want to learn more,
Yeah.
what is the best way for them to reach out?
Well, please find me on LinkedIn. Shauna Waters on LinkedIn and Fractional Insights as well. On there, we stay pretty active. Have a Substack for Fractional Insights. And those are probably the best ways. Uh, but also, reach out anytime via email, Shauna at fractionalinsights.ai.
Love it. And I'll make sure I have the links in the show notes you couldn't, if you missed any of that. So, well, Shauna, thank you so much for being with me. Such a pleasure. You're so charming, and I appreciate it. And your insights, and I'm such a fan, so I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm a fan of yours as well. It was great
Ah,
to
you're sweet. All right. Well, folks, that is Inside the Leader's Mind. I'm David Susan. If you've enjoyed this, please share it, subscribe, let other people know. We appreciate you. Until next time, thank you so much, folks.
Thank you.
Goodbye.